of its high-rise buildings. He felt that in general there wasn't enough roof space to provide for every apartment and family in the building. But that argument doesn't explain why solar hot water isn't found in historic Cairo or in its informal areas where the built environment is mainly low-rise buildings that offer plenty of roof space. When I asked Dr. Al-Hagar personally, inquiring also why he no longer took an interest in solar energy and had abandoned the lab, he referred me to a bookshelf in his office filled with texts on solar energy, sustainable development, and economics, and he said, "We did all this work in the 1970s and 80s. We proved it was feasible, beneficial, and advantageous from an engineering standpoint, from an economic standpoint, and from a social and environmental standpoint. But the politicians didn't want it. We couldn't get widespread support. I'm fed up with the whole thing. It's up to younger people like you to fight this fight now." Well, now with climate change, clean development mechanisms, and the possibility of carbon trading, and Egypt's need to carefully remove its energy subsidies so that it can export its gas and oil for hard currency without creating the kind of riots it recently experienced when food prices went up, a reconsideration of the country's renewable resources is taking place. But even with a plethora of new studies, Cardinal in 2003, Chedid 2000, Langness and Inca, Sideris 2003-2004, Langness 2008, McMcGonigal 2005, and there's been more recent literature, even with these studies providing the numbers and showing the enormous potential of solar technology to address Cairo's development challenges and help its economy in the world market, there's still an enormous amount of work to be done to understand the true value of hot water to the urban poor, and what and how much government, the market, and NGOs have to do to guarantee safe, reliable, and economic access to this amenity. While much work has been done exploring the energy paradox at the level of the firm, and some work has been done in modernized countries at the level of consumer choice, very little has been done at the level of the household in developing countries. Typically, a lot of effort has gone into finding ways to provide renewable energy systems, solar, biogas, wind, for the rural poor. See, for example, the Stockholm Challenge and the GEF small grants programs. And this is because those who live in remote off-the-grid locations are in a situation where the immediate economics of decentralized energy are favored by the ability to offset the cost of running services to the village. The urban poor, by contrast, have often been neglected as the target of clean development initiatives, presumably because they already have access to city services such as water, electricity, and gas. It has been felt that the economics of scale, the economies of scale, already reached in urban agglomerations obviate any advantage to be derived from retrofitting existing structures or exploring new ways of creating the built environment. And while McGonigal 2005 has dealt with the theoretical problem of accounting for solar's cost in an urban setting, changing its accounting mechanism from payback, which is typically 7 to 10 years, which reduces potential market penetration to less than 5% of consumers, to life cycle costing, the utility industry standard practice through which solar technologies emerge as the best least cost option, it is hard to get quick market penetration when other barriers persist. Upfront cost, low awareness, lack of codes and standards, lack of skilled installers, no legal right to light. No legal right to light. And the fact that heating issues, quote, do not have a high-tech image amongst consumers and policymakers, and little is known about the demand side of the consumer market in urban poor areas. On the other hand, in slum upgrading and in informal housing situations, the possibility does exist to make major infrastructural changes, particularly at the household level, because international development agencies, quote, often led by the World Bank, have been at the forefront of promoting slum upgrading programs, end quote. And the premise of many government policies was that housing conditions might appear substandard, but are likely to improve over time. Muhija 2000, page 13. Tenure legalization was considered key to improvements, with the assumption that people with legal title to their holdings would be willing to invest in upgrades and improvements. A necessary marriage must be made, they say, between the slum and the informal dweller's demands in terms of real utility, and the palette of upgrades and improvements on the supply side. In our visits to the two communities around Old Cairo with the UCLA Urban Planning Group, I found myself wondering which of the areas was more likely to embrace and adopt changing technologies, and what it would take to kickstart a renewable energy revolution in Cairo. Our hosts replied that one of the reasons environmentally friendly technologies were not being considered in the area was simply that, they said, you are not here to put it on the agenda. Each of us working in development, they said, has an interest and a passion, and there are few of us, and our time and energy are limited. So if you believe that renewable energy can make a difference here and want to dedicate yourself to finding ways to make it work, you are welcome. Tfaddal. You are welcome to come and join us. When I decided to follow up and met with Izzat Naim Gindi, the Zabaleen representative we'd met in his office at the German Agency for Technical Cooperation, he provided me with a research report they had done that showed that in the area we had visited, up to 3/4 of the residents surveyed reported having no hot water. Foreigners told us that this was nothing to worry about because Egypt was a hot country. This argument made sense during the summer. But my ex-wife and I had been living in Egypt for 3 years, and we knew how uncomfortably cold the winters became, and we'd lived literally without hot water service for a month while we were building and installing our solar hot water system in our unfurnished apartment in Beverly Hills, Egypt. We had resorted to boiling water on the stove and an electric tea kettle to prepare our bath water. We also found that we needed hot water in the summertime because mornings and evenings could still be uncomfortably chilly inside. Why would Cairo's poor behave any differently from us? Were they simply hardier than we were, used to putting up with discomfort and willing to bathe in cold water? I was familiar with this in tropical Indonesia, where we were forced to take a cold mandi every morning. Many days I resorted to waiting until 11 a.m. to heat water in the sun in a black plastic solar shower bag, to the amusement of my native hosts. Or were they meeting their hot water needs adequately using materials other than appliance heaters? Perhaps the GTZ data, by equating appliances with services, were misrepresenting the on-the-ground reality. Perhaps the report was conflating modern dedicated water heating consumer durables with hot water itself. A possible explanation was that everybody actually had hot water, but that they were getting it using capital stock they already had, and didn't find it cost-effective to invest in more convenient hot water appliances that actually led to greater sacrifices in convenience and financial security. As Hausman stated in the classic paper from 1979, if an econometric model of energy demand is to be successful, it must allow for the different nature of the adjustment of the two components of household energy demand. Econometric models, which do not differentiate the capital stock decision from the utilization decision, cannot capture the interplay of technological change and consumer choice in determining final energy demand. Engineering models which do not allow for consumer choice, but instead assume that the least cost design is adopted, will fail to capture the diversity of consumer behavior. End quote, page 34. The